Welcome along and welcome to talking about one of my absolute favourite topics, because anytime I talk to people about this, they say to me that this area feels like a game changer to them. Look, I'm going hard at the very start of the session, aren't I, in terms of making promises on these things. But very much what I find whenever I'm working with organisations is that a huge amount of change work is often really fantastic, but it just doesn't reach its full potential because it falls flat. We don't get the engagement, the connection, the excitement and energy from people that we want on things. And what I've noticed is actually that often that's because people aren't in a place to really come with us. They just don't have the base understanding, the energy or the safety that they need to drive through. And so one of the things that I've done in my work with organisations, and we really kind of foster at the Employee Experience Project, is yes, thinking about what are the things that we need to do to make change happen from a functional and a capability perspective, but also really thinking about this piece around mindset and people being in a place where they can come with us on that change and really support the journey. Because we know that culture change is a team sport. If we don't activate the masses, if we don't get the vast majority of people within our businesses having a willingness to demonstrate the behaviours, the kind of attitudes, the mindsets that we need to move forward, then it doesn't work. There's got to be that tipping point of the new behaviour, the new approach being what the majority adopt if we really want it to drive through. So this idea of priming readiness to change is massively important. And for us as a business, our ethos is very much about, for those of you who don't know us, supporting organisations to create contexts where people thrive and businesses really prosper. This is a picture of me on my absolute best day, and if you're working with me, this is the version of you that you get, the kind of the excitable person who will well, here I was inviting I had 70-plus-year-olds, sorry, doing their first fell race with me. So I love this picture because it reminds me of what a really great day at work looks like for me. A little aside, this picture was taken literally after I'd fallen headfirst into the water and I was just climbing out. But you can see that I was very much in my happy place. No agitation, no upset, just having the absolute time of my life. And I think when we think about culture change, if we really activate readiness, what we want to do is create this sense of excitement, momentum, adventure around the change that really allows people to come with us, to be willing to take some of those risks, to be willing to really overcome some of the challenges in a way that's about being energized and excited rather than one that might be about being fearful and unsure. So that's really what we're going to talk about in this session. We're going to focus, first of all, on this idea of really understanding readiness to change. We'll talk about a model for evaluating readiness, and after the session I'll send you out a link to our metric which allows you to evaluate current levels of readiness within your own business. It's only 16 items long, but I'll share the model with you and talk to you about how you use that. So we'll talk about this idea of evaluating readiness. Oh yeah,
sorry to interrupt. I was late joining. Are you going to share the recording after?
Yes, I will indeed.
Just
Absolutely.
so I don't know whether to make some extensive notes or just wait for the recording.
Oh,
Lovely.
good question, Charlotte. Yes, I'm gonna share the recording with everyone who's attended and anyone who's signed up. Just so yes, absolutely.
That's grand. Thank you very much. Cheers.
That's all right. So yeah, in today's session, we'll talk about this idea of readiness to change. We'll look at the model for how you evaluate it and understand it. We'll then think a bit about how you map the journey for fostering change, because it's not a 0 to 1 thing. It's much more of a kind of evolution over time piece. So we'll really think about that. How do you map that journey and what are those steps to supporting people forward? And then we'll do that. So what bit in terms of, well, it's all well and good understanding that stuff, isn't it? But let's talk about some techniques that you can use to really boost readiness. And the way that I've structured that piece is thinking about different groups. So you'll see whenever you get the tool that we give you techniques around how you boost the different stages of readiness. But we'll also talk today about how you might boost different groups, because you might want to be activating different groups within your organisation at different times in order to get them working with you in the change. Okay, so today's journey is really going to be a bit of or today's session is really going to be a bit of a journey where we'll work our way through that ourselves. And you'll notice as we talk about this, I'm a big journey person on these things, you know, not trying to force people from 0 to 100, but really building that sense of flow and momentum with people so they're excited to come with you on the journey, leading them up the mountain rather than just trying to chuck them to the top, because that feels much more painful, I think, for everybody involved. So We'll talk first of all about understanding readiness to change. So let me talk to you about this. So I just want to share this graphic with you, or these pictures with you first of all, because the truth is that change is really quite challenging and difficult. And if we think about this from a really kind of individual neuroscience perspective, you may know this anyway, but our brains are designed to build neural pathways which come from frequency of action and intent. So basically, what our brain does is whenever we have a particular interaction or we demonstrate a particular behavior, our brain sends an electrical pulse through our neural pathway. And over time, the more pulses that that pathway gets, the more ingrained, bigger, thicker, and therefore preferable to use it is for our brain. And so, whenever we're thinking about habit change and adaptation of behaviour on either an individual or an organisational perspective, we've got to remember that actually our existing behaviour is a bit like the path on the left, she says, checking my left and my right. It's well worn, it's easy, it's comfortable, and it's something that we're really used to doing because it's something that we've done for a long time before. Whenever we're asking people to demonstrate new behaviours or even to adopt new beliefs, even if we can get that initial flash of them doing that for the first time, what we've got to remember is that it's almost like asking them to climb up a sand dune as compared to walking through a lovely kind of path that's been built for them. It's difficult, it's fatiguing, and our brain, because it wants us to keep energy so that we can, reproduce and live as long as we can, it doesn't really want us to be climbing up sand dunes. It wants us to take the really easy paths that allow us to get to an end point as quickly as possible, even if that's not the right end point for us. So, if we recognize that whenever we're asking people to change, we're asking them to continually climb up that difficult sand dune until that becomes a path well trodden, we understand why people start to choose and slip back to the easy path very easily. And it's the same from a neural connection point of view. We might try something new, we build a new neural connection, but it's small, it's flimsy, it's not well chosen. And if our brain can, it'll send the electrical impulse through the neural pathway that's well developed and it's used before. So part of understanding change is about how do we foster and garner enough motivation and intent to get people to the place where they want to keep coming up the sand dunes with us until we turn that into the path that is most trodden and most comfortable. Does that make sense to people? Seem reasonable? Yeah. So from an individual perspective, I'll be depressing everybody now because I'm just saying how hard change is, aren't I? I'm going to take you a bit further. I'm sorry. I'm going to take you a bit deeper into the well on this, really. But it's even harder from a cultural point of view because if you think about it, that's not just about one individual's intent and motivation. What we're really looking at when we think about culture is this reinforcing system. People often ask me what culture is. Where does behavior end? Where do attitudes end? And where does culture start? But in my world, culture is this reinforcing system where we have ideas, customs, and beliefs that ultimately funnel up to create our culture. But those cultural norms then reinforce the types of behaviors that become normal, the types of processes that we build within our systems, and the types of stories and beliefs that we tell ourselves. So it's this closed reinforcing system where we believe something, then we look around and other people are behaving that way, and that encourages us to believe that a little bit more, or we behave in a certain way and that fits with how everyone else is doing, and we keep on in that cycle. So in culture change, not only are we asking people to fight against their own natural kind of neural makeup, we're also asking them to break that system apart, break out of that reinforcing cycle and do something different so that we can create a new feedback flow through there that over time evolves the culture and shifts it forward. So we're asking people to disrupt, we're asking people to be different, and we're asking them to really do something that's counter to what that system is asking them to do. So that's why that piece around readiness is massively important, because the amount of effort, energy, and revolutionary spirit that it takes to be able to do that is quite significant. So often whenever we're thinking about change, what we do is very much focus on this point of liftoff and getting into flight. And this is really how I think about it. We focus a lot of our change initiatives and energy around, right, let's get ourselves into flight and let's take the journey of change, when actually, if we thought more about the length of our runway in the early stages and getting the momentum that we needed in place, that point of takeoff and ability to kind of then succeed in flight would be much easier. And so for us, this piece around readiness of change is about that length of runway. And what that doesn't mean is turning change programs from, 2 years into 15 years so that we can make everybody feel cozy and comfortable about it. It's about the mix of activities that we're doing as we're activating change to make sure that we're building that momentum and we're really getting people to come with us on the journey before we ask them to make very tangible and significant changes around things. Any thoughts, observations, questions about that? What do you think? Make sense? Okay. So, really, what we're looking to do as we focus on readiness to change is a few things. We want to make sure that we're considering how we reduce resistance. We want to facilitate people in making progress around things. But the other point around this is also we want to prevent full relapse. Now, what that doesn't mean is that we won't get slide backs. Within the prevent relapse element, what we're talking about here is that sense of having some of those conversations about how challenging change really is and supporting people to recognise that slipping back to the path well travelled is totally common and actually probably pretty predictable for all of us, but helping people recognise that that doesn't mean that we've tried it and it's failed, but recognizing that we need to have periods of reset and refocus in our change, and that it needs to be okay that we slide back sometimes so that we can remove the shame of refocusing, resetting, and trying again until we really get that pathway embedded and it feels like the one that needs to be most travelled. So overall, what we're trying to do is support that sense of control, connection, and motivation in the change that allows people to feel excited. So the way that we focus on this and how we look at building this is an adapted version of a very common kind of clinical model of around behaviour change. But we've kind of built it out a little bit to make sure that it works for broader kind of community and culture change on things. And for us, what we find is that there are four key components to really getting people connected and interested in change. The first one is awareness. And what I mean by that is really that base understanding that a change is required. And this often comes down to what is this change needed from a business perspective, but how will it impact me on a day-by-day basis? How will it support me to do a great job? And so for this stage, really what we want to be thinking about is how do we connect this to the day-to-day business of what we do, either as individuals within our roles or as an organisation in terms of that overall purpose and what we're driving forward. So connecting culture, how we act, how we behave, the decisions that we make and how we treat each other on a day-by-day basis to the ultimate outcomes of the business, and linking it to that overall strategic narrative and purpose is massively important. So showing people what type of culture we need to succeed, given whatever our job goals or our overall organizational goals, is massively important. So there are a lot of organizations that I work with where it's like, yeah, we know we need to be different, but we don't really want to change how it feels around here. We're all lovely to each other. It feels really nice here. It's a really lovely family feel, or whatever it may be. But the stories that we tell ourselves that tell us actually, yeah, we want to change, but we don't really. So getting that sense of tipping point, understanding why this needs to happen, why it's a reality for the business, and how that culture change is going to come, even if we don't necessarily feel comfortable with it, is a massive important piece. And it's one that we often miss because what we do is we tell people the strategic plan, we tell them the vision, but we don't tell them the detail of what does that mean in terms of how we need to behave and how we need to treat each other around here to get there. And what does that mean in terms of how I as an individual need to act differently to allow us to achieve those goals. So that sense of connecting that overall purpose, vision, and the strategic priorities of the business to what it feels like and how we act around here on a day-to-day basis is massively important. Make sense? Seem reasonable? Yeah. The next set for me then is a piece around mindset. So again, each of these pieces kind of build on each other, but they can, one or two or three can be there with one missing. And if we've just got one missing, it really kind of undermines. And this is one that I see even in the best change is often missing quite regularly. The mindset and acceptance that change is required, but that I need to change as much as everyone else does. And I'm sure you'll all recognize this mode in an organization that seems really primed for change. Everybody's talking about how change is needed, but whenever you have a conversation, all of their focus is on how other groups and other people need to change rather than on what they need to do to influence things, there is less awareness and understanding of how their day-to-day behaviours impact and decisions really influence how other people behave. And a really beautiful example of this that I see pretty much day in, day out, if I'm honest, and a large number of organisations that I work with, is being brought in and asked to support increase of personal agency of staff around really encouraging them to take more responsibility, to take more risks, to make this happen for us. But then when you look at the dynamic, you find a leadership team that's in a high control, kind of high parental mode, who do not create the space at all for people to really be able to have that sense of personal agency. They've created a natural suppression in capability, motivation, intent for people to be able to take responsibility. And supporting a business to understand how it really is an echo chamber and how our behaviours create signals and bids to others and how they need to behave is a massive part of this. So that bit around mindset can be quite challenging. And I think it's particularly difficult to do if we're in a fixed mentality where we're just telling everybody where everything's wrong and how they need to be different. Where mindset shift is much more helpful is where we're driving a build mentality and thinking about how accepting we are where we are, and it's got us to where we are now, which is probably not a bad place if we're thinking about growth or moving forward. Let's call it neutral, not always, but accepting that sense of where we are now, and then considering, well, how do we move forward? How do we let go of where we are now and build the relationships and the interactions and the intent that we need for moving forward, that ecosystem that will create support for us and success moving forward, rather than focusing on what's gone wrong in the past. So mindset is a massive piece and often a really challenging piece, because we go in a room, we really think that everybody's up for the change, but if we're really listening, we can hear that actually this component's missing. Yeah, people recognise that. It's dead easy, isn't it, to see what everybody else needs to do. My husband will tell you that as well, about what goes on in our house most evenings. Yeah. Any thoughts or observations about that? What do you think?
I was just going to mention, Paula, I was just going to talk about, so like just thinking about, some people are going back to the well-trodden path, really, that actually they kind of can get the why, but their ability to let go of changing the approach that has served them so well to that point, it's really difficult. So we do the mindset piece and go, this is why, and this is why it's important, but they revert to type all the time. And I'm trying to get my head around, how do we get to a place where they can understand what's in it for them?
Yeah.
And for me, they've almost got to live the experience first to know what's in it for them, but I can't get them across the line to do that.
Yeah, I think it's such sorry, excuse me, such a good observation, Kit. For me, I think we're thinking about the key components of true change around this. There's three pieces for me on that. One is, do people understand the standard? So kind of on top of the readiness piece and that priminess, do they understand the standard? Do they really know what different looks like so that they know what to try? Have they got the capability to do it? But I think the third piece is about accountability, and the group that you're talking about there, it's really about a system of accountability. So in a change where we're just trying to sell it to people and we're just trying to give them the tools that they need to do it, but there's no kind of consequence for not doing it, it's dead easy just to go back to what's comfortable, because there's nothing creating that discomfort. So in a system where we've done everything we can to prime readiness, but we've still got a group of people who are unwilling to come with us, then we've got to shift the comfort level. We've got to drive accountability through the system in terms of what that new behaviour and that new tone looks like. And that really, in my experience, I was going to say that's the only way to do it, as if I've had every experience on it, but in my experience, that is the only way to do it. And that's often a piece that's missing, because we try to make it purely this positive, fluffy, come with us, guys. And that's a really important piece of it, but we've got to have that hard edge of accountability as well, would be my view.
Feels tough, that sometimes.
Absolutely. And also, it's hard to do in isolation. I think it needs to be systemic accountability. That's got to come through the whole business. If it's just something that you're trying to do as an localized activator of change, then you can't necessarily create the true role-based accountability that's required, which is why we do so much work with the top in terms of that standard and goal setting and thinking about how do you flow this through your teams and make sure that you support people around that. Anika, go ahead.
Hi. I wanted to say I really loved that mindset piece, and I think for me the observation is, as somebody in an OD team, the temptation is often, as you say, to look at everybody else and think that just because we're in the OD team or in HR or whatever, that we know that it's the leaders that need to do whatever they need to do, or it's other teams. And I love that as a really powerful reminder of actually, well, how's my mindset doing? How am I, even though I understand that we need to do various changes, and I agree with them, and I've helped people write the golden thread and all of that. There's still something I think that's really powerful about challenging your own mindset within that, and your own role model that you can be, right, as a staff member, as well as maybe an advisor to some of the leaders, and how that's really powerful, rather than always going, well, the leaders need to do this and these teams need to do this, but including yourself and the OD team as part of that ecosystem, I think is really powerful.
Absolutely. And I think to that observation, one of the things that I notice most when I'm working with HR teams is that often that there has become an unhelpful dynamic where perhaps they've been working so hard and tirelessly to drive culture over a period of time that actually they've ended up owning it accidentally. They become the custodians and the superheroes of culture. And one of the big challenges around culture change and truly activating readiness in other groups is stepping back and creating the space for other people to own that. So recognizing where we might be accidentally suppressing other people's ownership and capacity to really lead, I think is a big part of what I notice as a routine part of the HR journey. And it's all from really positive intent and a real desire to be able to connect and stop any of the negative consequences of difficult culture that people see. But it's definitely an unpicking that is quite routine and needs to happen. So I really appreciate that observation. Great. Okay, so I'll just talk to you about the other elements that we really focus on in as we're considering how we prime a system for change. So we've talked about that idea of awareness and mindset. The next piece for us, and the one that we notice that people normally have nailed on pretty well actually, is this piece around capability. So often what we see is we're taking people through a journey of recognizing that a change is needed, building that sense that I need to change, is that without the confidence and not only the confidence, but also the practical skills, for confidence seems to be the differentiator, the confidence and the ability to navigate the change and activate within it, what you're really doing is just open people into staring into the abyss. And we create those moments quite a lot in change where you're helping people really understand what needs to happen, the size of the change that's required, but also the fact that they need to do something about it. And suddenly this huge chasm opens in terms of, oh gosh, right, well, how do we do that? And that piece around capability is massively important. How we support people to have the tools, the resources, the base skills that they need to take the journey towards demonstrating the behaviours that we require is important. And I think for me, it's really important to be empathetic with people around the capability and recognise the fact that just giving people some initial training or activation workshops, etc., like we often do, and then leaving them to get on with it. We've got them up the sand dune once. We've maybe given them the kit, but they don't definitely know how to use it. They don't necessarily have the opportunity or the support to get themselves up there again. So recognizing in this capability piece that yes, we do need to give that training and development and support, but being really considerate in terms of what do people have capacity for, and if we're trying to get them from 0 to 100, do we do all the development that they need to get to the top of the mountain straight away, or are we just trying to get them to that first lake and then do the first pass before we move on? How do we actually ensure that we tier our development and we tier our expectation of people's evolution in a way that feels sustainable, so they can celebrate victories on the way rather than just stare into the chasm and think, oh, well, you've given me a rope to throw across here, but I still don't know how to get it tethered to the other side and get myself across. So capability, often the one that we see people paying most attention to and really seeking to kind of engage people around, but often done in a all or nothing type of way, which just overwhelms people, and they don't necessarily, often they haven't got the base foundations of the other elements in place that allow them to really take advantage of that training and development. Sometimes just too much is done too fast, which really makes it difficult for them. So considering that journey and the stages that you might want to evolve people through is important.
Sorry, Paula,
Yeah. Go ahead,
Could
Liz.
I just add on that as well? I just think it's super, super important, that piece, in that people need to be given the opportunity to fail as well.
Yeah.
So because you're not going to get change right first time, usually. So I think it's really nice that if the leadership can create that safety, that psychological safety around, well, okay, we're going to hand you this. Yes, there's the chasm, if you like. We've given you everything we can, but now it's really, we have to work together to make it happen. Yeah. So people, if you're pressured to sort of only speak up when you think you know the absolute answer, that can be quite uncomfortable for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Liz. I totally agree with that. And I think that probably brings us nicely into this next area to consider, which is then the piece around opportunity to change. So are we creating an environment where it's possible for people to actually start to apply these skills, apply this mindset, and try out new behaviours? So what we often think about within this is things like our change governance processes, or people's delegated authority. If we get them excited and we show them what the future is and we ask them to be part of it, but then we put them back into a system that isn't giving them any give, and is asking them just to behave as they always have, one of two things will happen. They'll get frustrated and they'll stop trying, or they'll burn out trying because they're trying to fight against the system. And often what we do in change is we celebrate those superheroes who go out and we ask ourselves, well, why can't everybody else do it the way that Bob does? Because he just goes out and gets round everybody and makes everything happen, etc. And really being able to recognize actually that those people who can superhero and do that, well, they don't often do it sustainably. Often they do it for a while and then they'll just go somewhere else where it's easier to do the things that they want to do. Those people are the exception to the rule, and they will not drive our tipping point and change. So we need to stop fixating on those individuals and why everybody else can't be like them, and instead think about, well, how do we prime an environment where average Joes like most of us are actually able to enact and drive that change? So really looking at our environment and thinking, is it ready? Have we briefed our exec to be different within the exec session? When someone doesn't bring a 56-page PowerPoint, they only bring a 6-page and they say, trust me, I've done the research? Or are they going to smack those people back and say, actually, I need another, I need those other 40 pages to be sure of this? Have we created an environment that when people try new behaviours, those who are in power or the systems that are going to hold them in place are able to flex enough to allow them to be able to influence and move that forward? So while I am definitely not a proponent of top-down change, what I am absolutely a supporter of is a conversation with those who are the keepers of the systems, the processes and the norms, the power, and ensuring that they are ready to flex and give people the space to experiment with new behaviours and safety and help them succeed with those new behaviours rather than pushing them back into their old system. And this, for me, is probably one of the biggest gaps that I see. We expect people to be able to push through existing and static systems, and we use those superheroes as the stick to beat everyone else, rather than recognising that they are the anomaly, rather than them being the norm. We can't create a business full of superheroes. What we need to do, if we want sustainable change, is create an environment that's flexible enough to take people with them. She says that like it's really easy, but I've got some suggestions in terms of how you do it in a bit. Okay. So let's talk then about this idea of evaluating progress. So as I mentioned, we've got a really short, sharp tool, just kind of, we have a full diagnostic that we use in our organisational consultancy. But what I've done, because this just feels so important to me, we've created a really short, sharp measure, which just gives you 4 indicators across each of the areas. So 16 items that allows you to just measure readiness within your own organisation. Or if you're working with a particular manager on a particular change project, or some change that they're trying to drive with their team, you can use it, work through it with them, and you'll get back a kind of personalised report that's saying which of these components, have we got all of these components in place, or is there anything that we need to work on along here? So I'll send that link out. I'll put it in the chat at the end of the session. I've realised I meant to save it before I went in, but I'll close this and get it for you by the end of the session. But I'll also send it out in the follow-up email with the recording. So for me, just having the conversation across these four areas when you're working with your leaders around change, when you're talking, for example, with your exec or your senior leaders about why people aren't buying in or coming with them. It allows you to really break down some of what might be going on, but also have some of the conversations that are helpful around, well, I notice you talking a lot about what other people need to do, but let's focus on what it is that we, what this conversation is about, what we need to change to shift that ecosystem. So that conversation about reinforcing system and helping people notice that they have an opportunity to break the system themselves through their own actions can be quite helpful. And I find this a really useful model to depersonalize that and allow some of that conversation to happen. To the point that I made earlier about not wanting to focus on top-down change, but making sure that we activate and create that flex in the system and the energy in the system with the people who are really going to be able to activate change for you. Typically, when I'm first working with an organisation, I will be doing that readiness to change evaluation on 3 core groups to understand if they're in the place to be able to activate other people. So looking first of all at the exec team, do they really understand why they want this change, or are they just really annoyed that nobody takes things off them, even though when they do take them off them, they've got to do it exactly how they thought about it? Are they in that fixed mentality, or do they understand where their business is going, why they want things to shift and how they want things to shift, and do they understand their own role in that? Looking the same at the HR team, what mode are they in terms of that facilitation and activation of their organisation? Are they going to be try and be the change that they seek and therefore create that vacuum that makes it difficult for other people? Or do they really understand the different components of change that they need to activate so they don't just rush straight to training and hope that their enthusiasm brings everyone with them? And the other area that I really look at is the piece around internal comms. And is that part of the business really focusing on fostering that narrative, building that awareness, and making those connections, and also doing that work around setting out the standard and supporting people to understand the mindset that's required moving forward. So together, for me, these 3 groups create the conditions for change to be activated. They allow the exec will set the tone. If their behaviour starts to shift subtly, they will create that sense of awareness and mindset and safety that actually something can be different. HR have the space to really build that capability, but host some of those really great conversations that move that forward. And internal comms are the people who engage the masses. It's really important that you're thinking about the story that you're telling around the change, that you're connecting that to the day-to-day of the business, getting it out of the HR agenda into this is how we do work and this is how we succeed as a business to really make sure that people come with us. So that's the first area that I look. And typically what we're doing is working through a number of different areas. So this is just a kind of high level version of the tool that I'll send out to you. But this is our kind of high level readiness checklist that we're looking at. I'm not going to read this to you. I'll give you a minute to have a look at it and I'll take a drink of my Vimto to help my throat. So basically what this is doing, it'll show you some of the behavioural indicators that suggest that this might be an area that you need to focus on. So if you're ticking off some of these in your head, then you know that this might be a priority for you. Anybody ticking off more than they hoped they would be as they were looking at it? Thanks, Kate. So in understanding where different groups are, we can do this in lots of different ways. We can, as I said, I'm doing this evaluation as I meet key groups and organisations, working with them, understanding different points that people are at. But as part of our formal kind of initial consultation with organisations, we're measuring this as well, so we can understand what different, segment the data, role level of tenure, different parts of the business, etc. Because it may be actually that different leadership tones, different experiences mean that different groups are in very very different places around this. And understanding that helps you then to be quite targeted in your strategy for change driving forward. And it allows you to think about there may be some groups that you can use as your Trojan horses for change, who are really primed for change already. They've perhaps got the minds, the awareness, the mindset and the opportunity, but the capability isn't there. So you can go in quickly, do a capability uplift, and then use that as a case study to activate the rest of the organisation. Or it may be that you've got some of the other areas that are really prime, but you just need to do that awareness piece so you can step in and really focus on that and activate. So understanding where there might be a few linchpin places, and you might find in some teams and some contexts you do just have one or two of the factors that are missing that would really activate people that you can click to get things moving, can be really helpful. Often what we find though is that there's a bit of a mix really, and it's very common we find that the piece around awareness and mindset is missing because people have got into that fix moan mode about things in terms of these are all the things that are wrong and you just need to go away and fix that because it annoys me, without any real business mode behind it. So I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of you find that some of that piece around what does good look like, where are we trying to go, why is this important, and what's your role within it is probably areas that you want to focus on. But what I would say is whatever you see in terms of the change that you want to drive through, it's really important that you think about the fact that it's human beings with actual day jobs and lots of other pressures that you're asking to work with you on this. And so ensuring that as you're mapping the journey that you want to take with people, that you think about the individual steps that you're taking people on in order to evolve roles over time. So in the change programs that we run, we always look at the phases of operation that we're working through, whether that's defining the ideal leadership model for the executive team. We might say this is where we want you to get to, but we'll define anywhere up to 3 phases in terms of getting there. What does that look like as we work our way through? We do the same when we're working with HR teams, etc. as well, where often we find we're working with organisations where people might, from a cultural point of view, have got caught in that one-man band or policing role where it's our job to do all of the things for everyone. We've got to go and moan about the fish in the microwave if somebody's done it, or when somebody swore at somebody when they shouldn't have, or the like. We seem to be responsible for all good behaviour within our organisation. But also, we're the only people in the room who are saying, yeah, but what about the people whenever there's broader decisions being made? So we can't just flip from that role into let go and let you do whatever you want to do. We need to think about, well, how do we evolve that? How do we move into a mode of initially standing beside our leaders to guide them and support them, show them the way, draw back over time and ask ourselves to kind of create space until ultimately we're the overall owner and conductor of the culture, but we're not the people who are owning and playing all of the instruments all day, every day. And it's the same for leaders. We can't expect an over-engaged, over-connected, over-controlling executive team to just go straight to a 4-page briefing and let everybody take responsibility. The system won't be primed, mistakes will happen and they'll pull back into place. So supporting them to start to have some experiments, to do some play around what that looks like, to try some things that are a bit low stake, to build their trust, to support them on one of the really simple things that we do with really kind of controlling leadership teams is get them to put a talent plan in place with their immediate reports. So let's put a specific timeline in the next 6 to 12 months. What does your role look like compared to what your direct reports are doing? And what is the development work that's happening to make that happen? And what are the stage gates for it? So supporting them to take that very concrete and tangible journey to say, what are the barriers to you behaving in this way? And how do we start to overcome those in a structured way that we can check into and hold you accountable for over time? Because if we just try to move people from one role to another, it doesn't work and people feel scared and overwhelmed. If we show them what the journey is, it also makes sense to people as behaviour shifts over time. So again, from an awareness and a mindset point of view, it would feel really uncomfortable for me as a direct report if my leader went straight from being in every single bit of detail and making the decisions to suddenly saying, well, you do it, that's grand, it'll be fine, won't it? It's not going to succeed. But if we're having conversations as leaders and we're supporting our leaders to have conversations about, look, this is where we're going to get to. By this point, this is what I want you to be doing. This is what I want your role to be and my role to be. So let's take the journey together. That gives context to any shifts in behaviours and it stops pendulum shifts of overcorrection and frustration because I've decided that I want to be less in the detail and now I'm really annoyed that you're bringing me the detail, but we've never talked about the fact that you shouldn't do that anymore. So that idea of evolution communication, recontracting, reconnection, building that through your change journey so that people understand the steps that need to be taken, and then supporting them to drive that is useful. What's people's thoughts on that? Does that seem realistic in the hubble bubble of the day in, day out? What's your thoughts?
I was just going to mention that for me, as somebody that drives and leads change, I think for my team, this is really important, because I think they are all parts of this journey depending on their different stakeholder relationships. But actually, some are more mature than others, and but actually really helpful tool to help them understand the journey. And it's not just because it's like that, it's static. It can move, but we might need to move through different phases to get to the right target state.
Absolutely. And I think as activators of change, we can really personalize the barriers, can't we? It feels really frustrating. We feel like we've put all of the conditions for change in place. We've created something that's going to be great for the individuals, great for the business, and then people don't come with us. And you get to the point of just like, but it becomes personal. It becomes about them as an individual or their behavior rather than necessarily about the environment that they're operating within. And I think if we want to be effective agents of change, this just gives us that ability to step back and say, well, yeah, what's the blocker? What is it that I can work on here? Rather than this person is difficult or resistant to change, it's what is it in the system that I might be able to shift? Thanks, Kate. Sandra, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, I think this is really insightful. I think certainly my reflection is that going back to what you said about leaders and not expecting them to just make a big jump and, they want something to happen, but actually having different phases of what do we need from them and where do we want them to get to support the change to happen is something that I don't think we do very well. And it's a real takeaway this for me, because I think I think there's that sort of when you're thinking senior leaders, there's that sort of expectation that, seen as they're setting the kind of overarching goal of what they want, that they're then already ready to get there. But actually, my experience is they can be the biggest blockers to getting there because they aren't being supported properly to recognise the journey for themselves and what needs to change within them and their behaviour, and how therefore they're going to then help others. So it was just really a reflection on that.
Lovely. Thank you. Thanks, Sandra. And I agree with you. I think the job is often hardest for senior leaders, because as you progress through an organisation, you have the capacity to lean into your strengths and your own preferences in a way that you don't really get at other layers in a business, because people are watching you and you're accountable to them. And so if your behavior needs to shift, not only are you not supported, but you're not used to that, because you're used to being able to create an environment around your own preferences. And I think it's a huge ask of people. And I think if we can humanize this, then we're much more likely to bring people with us on it. Thank you. Anika, go ahead.
I think I just want to agree with you. What I love about this model is that it normalizes what you were talking about at the beginning about like slipping back into old behaviors, and how actually, because we've broken it down into a process that you're allowed to, take baby steps, and it's 2 steps forward, 3 steps back sometimes, and all of that growth is acceptable because it's part of the journey, and that's like spelled out right at the beginning, and therefore it's much less threatening, I would imagine, and much less scary, and therefore people are more willing to jump and go, okay, I will try this, because I'm going to be held in every space that I need to be able to get to the end line, rather than unrealistic expectations being set from the outset. So I think it's very powerful.
Yeah, that sense of perfection. It feels to me like removing the pressure of writing on the first page of a new notepad. It's all right to make a mistake, isn't it? And try again. It's more a spiral bound one. You can just pull that page out and go and give it another go, see what happens. I can see all the stationery lovers who know the pain is real on that, isn't it? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about actions to kind of boost readiness then. So as I mentioned, for us, there are a range of different things that you can do. And what I'm not suggesting here is that we don't kind of take the plane off as we go. We might start to interrelate or interweave these activities into the change that we're driving already. So I'll just give you an example. Just finishing off a consultation for a client that we're working with at the moment. And in, the standard change part, that's phase one, isn't it? Understand what's going on so you can define the problem. In our world, what we're thinking about there is, yes, we're doing the consultation, but actually a lot of the work that we're doing, data collection from our point of view to get a sense of what needs to happen from a capability and opportunity point of view to drive the change forward. But actually a big chunk of what we're doing in that connection with the business and gathering that information is having conversations that's about boosting awareness and mindset. So even in the way that we're hosting focus groups, we're not just talking about, well, what are the things that you want to change? We're talking to people about what's already in place that could work really well. What do you notice in yourself that you think needs to be different compared to others? What are the opportunities that you see for your team to do things differently? What are the quick wins? So what we're doing is encouraging people to put themselves at the heart of the change. We're talking in the introduction of that session about where the business is going, what its impact is, and what it wants to do moving forward. So we're flavouring all of those interactions that we're driving to run the mechanics of the change in terms of let's solve the problem of what culture this business needs and how we get there, by driving and priming readiness through all of those interactions that we're having. So being very purposeful in those connections, those communications, thinking about how we're priming readiness at each of those stages is massively important. And it allows us then to be able to really activate when we are ready to go out with the standard and how we move forward. We've already got the flow and the buzz and the momentum on that coming through. So for us, the awareness stage is really about comms. And I say it 3 times because you need to do it 3 times more than you ever think you need to, don't you? Liz will, as the expert of this, Liz will agree with me. You probably say it's more like 47 times, is it, Liz, rather than 3? But really overstating and continuing to overstate more times than you ever thought you needed to until you're absolutely sick of it. Really what this looks like. So why are we doing it? Why is it important? And how does it fit into your day job? And the things that you care about for your day job. So really understanding, what do your people care about in their role? Is it the impact that they have on customers? Is it the salary that they bring home? Is it the fact that it allows them to pick the kids up at the end of the day? Understanding what good impact looks like for their job and talking about how a shift in culture is going to drive that for them is massively important. Mindset, I think a lot of that is about comms as well, but we find actually that collecting data that looks at kind of relationship mapping, we often use things like, we use the transactional analysis model a lot to depersonalize that a bit. So it's not just you're penaltive or you're controlling. What we're saying is you're caught in a parent-child mode, and what does that look like, and how do we evolve that to something else? So showing people, we do relationship mapping and kind of have a look at really what's happening around that and what feeds you're getting into certain places and how that's creating other behaviours in other places. And also really looking at coaching and support, whether that's on a team and an individual level, particularly with the exec team early on, to help them reach some of those understandings and reflections themselves. I will often do a very early session with the leadership team that's talking about current context. Where do you want to get to? What does that look like? But in that session, I'm listening to what they're saying about the dynamic, and I'll be sharing with them what I'm seeing from a kind of bids and outcomes point of view, with the aim being that they're coming to conclusions themselves in that first session about what the dynamics are likely to be. So by the time we're presenting results, it's old news because we've already talked about it and explored it, and then we've gone away to test it in the data collection. Capability for me is about development resources and support. So giving people the tools, the space to develop that. Both about developing the capability, but also the confidence that they have the capability and they can apply it. That's massively important as well. And the opportunity piece is about starting to influence the environment, creating systems, processes and reactions where people are going to support, enable you to make change, and also activate you around that. So that's all so far so vague. So what I've done, there's lots of words in this slide, but we'll share the deck with you as well on this. But I think the first thing for me in the boosting awareness piece is about 2 things. One is about defining your burning platform. So really talking about why does this need to be different? And what I don't mean here, again, I mean this from a build mentality. I think often we interpret a burning platform as somewhere where we have to make it. We have to make the old thing so terrible that we've got to move on from it. But sometimes actually it's just about making the thing that we're trying to get to so enticing that we've got to move towards it. So that personalization of why is this important? Where is the business going? Really connecting into what does that look like in terms of what we need to do from a market point of view, from an intention point of view, what our regulators, etc., are asking us to do, the stuff that people worry about on a practical basis, on a day-to-day basis, connect to that. Whilst I'm talking about that, it occurs to me that I wrote a blog on this in terms of how you connect culture change to your business case a while ago. So I'll pop the link to that into the follow-up email that we've sent out, because it's got some really good questions you can ask your leadership team around that. So understanding really why this is important to the business is important. And then the other piece is really about showing that value to culture. So how the behaviours and that shift in attitude and approach will drive those results is important. So for me, this is about good conversations, understanding what's important to your people, perhaps doing some persona work where you go in and understand what different types of people you have in your business, what is important to them in terms of their experience at work, and why they're here, why they're staying, and what will make them feel happier, healthier, and more connected at work, and link your comms into the trends in terms of what people are saying are important. And nothing is wrong. And nothing is the wrong answer. I started my life in the consultancy part of a recruitment business, my professional life, many years ago. And every bit of culture change, if you told people it was because they could bill more fees to get more commission, they would have done it for you. That worked. That was the deal in that business, and it worked perfectly well. People knew it. So be clear on what your deal is and what's important to your people, and leverage that deal. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's important to your people and sustainable. So we often kind of flip the stages of readiness into personas and use that. So again, there's a blog that I can share with you on this, but where people have low awareness, often they're in that denier stage. It's lovely here, we don't need to change it, we need to keep our friendly feel. Those who have low mindset will be in that blamer phase. Everybody else needs to change, we do need to shift, but it's not me, it's all of them over there. Those who perhaps understand it but don't have the capability, probably in full-on blown panic. This is huge. How are we ever going to do this? It's not even possible. And then those who really know they can do it and they see the opportunity, they'll be in superhero phase. But you've got those two modes of superhero that you need to think about. They could become real detractors if they burn out, versus those who are really going to support and help you thrive around things. So as base personas, they can be a helpful place to start in terms of your comms around that readiness piece, but I'd really be anchoring it into what's the deal and what's important with people. And we share a little bit there in terms of what the different modes or the different things that you might want to say to people to connect them in. For mindsets, really, there's a few things that come with this that I would want you to think about. I've mentioned already that piece around positive narrative. That's massively important. Kate mentioned a bit around, well, how do you get people moving if they just don't want to? Accountability is massively important. If we want people to take responsibility, we need to give them a sense of accountability. And with that comes continual feedback mechanisms, so helping people see their impact on others and understand that. So one of the things that we do very regularly with clients is build an impact-based 360, particularly for the leadership tiers, where they're getting regular routine feedback on how their actions are impacting other people's perceptions of them. So that piece around creating that feedback loop of this, when I act like this, it makes people feel like and behave like this, is a really helpful thing to do. So that piece around self and impact awareness is massively important in this area, and I think is hugely undervalued within the exec space as well. We just expect them to get it and get on with it, and often they really don't notice things. Also thinking about team engagement activities, I think those are things that often happen quite a lot, that kind of activation of the values, and also really looking at role models and success stories to show people what good looks like on the other side can be helpful. Fostering capability, I'm not going to spend a whole huge amount of time on this. You can kind of have a look, but because I think this is an area that we often find quite easy. Pieces around training, development, mentor, etc. One thing I would say about fostering capability is often we try to do this in-house, and we don't always have the differing perspective of been there, done that, or just different experience in terms of being able to see where the ecosystem might be able to shift. So that piece around mentoring, either reverse mentoring, external mentoring, just breaking down the usual communication channels and feedback loops can be really helpful. And then the last thing I would say, this piece around providing opportunity, this is often the one that people go, what are you even talking about, Paula? What do you mean by this? Well, what I would suggest is that there's a number of things that we can do around this. One is really taking a campaign-based approach to things, business-wide element around some of the clear commitments that you're making about behavioural shifts. So a business that I was working with late last year, we did a huge campaign on radical candour. So they found it really difficult to have difficult conversations, to break through that veil of we're all nice and friendly here. So we did a massive bit of work around the value of radical candour. What does that look like? How do you receive feedback? How do you give feedback? We did training and development with people around what that looks like as well in terms of honest and courageous conversations. But we made that a really visible thing because it was such a sacred cow within the business that if people had just gone out and tried to do it, they probably would have been perceived as just being rude or unfriendly or a bit unkind. So we had to make it something that was very visibly being lifted and pushed. So think about where you might have some sacred cows. How do we give organisational wide permission to play this out? We also use action sprints a lot, bringing teams across different parts of the business together to look at where friction points and change are and giving them some time, budget and responsibility to solve those with some exec sponsorship and input to grease the wheels where things need to around that. And also really focus businesses around thinking about process and system re-engineering, where decision-making, delegated authority, decision-making processes or the like might be causing friction. Just go in and unpick them and fix them. And that's how you work through. And really look at the exec supporting and moving things forward. I've just seen a question about execs. So for me, good question, Joe. It comes down to accountability. So I've just spent an hour on this morning on the phone with a non-exec board for a business that I'm working with, talking to them about their role and keeping their chief exec and exec accountable as we drive through the change. So I think some of it's about that feedback loop so that they can see the impact that that's had on the change. Our capacity as change leaders to be able to build that relationship where we can coach, reflect and feedback that with them. So moving back from being in service to the exec to being a coach to the exec around the change. And then I think thinking about where the accountability mechanisms around that may be and making sure that we put those in place. Now, those things, I think it's difficult to re-engineer that if you're already in the process. I think where you are is probably about a courageous conversation and a real conversation about the impact of the change that it's having. But you can put some of those mechanisms in place early so that you have that contracting to mean that you don't have to try and contract that while you're trying to have the conversation. It's not easy. Okay, so that's everything I wanted to talk about. I was going to leave some time for questions, but I got excited. We did some during the session, didn't we? Standard. For those of you who know me well, you know that's what happens. So I can, if anybody wants to ask any questions, I'm happy to take a couple. I recognise that people are probably getting ready for their 11 o'clock. So thank you so much for your time and your attention. I will pop the slides, the recording, the slides, and also the link to the assessment, the self-assessment out to you later on today, so you've got that. But if anybody wants to continue the conversation, just give me a shout. You can probably tell this is by far my favourite topic. Thank you, everybody.